They thought they were just filming another viral humiliation, but they had no idea someone else was already watching. The video would later hit 10 million views in under 2 hours, shared across every platform, dissected, debated, and replayed in silence by millions who couldn't look away. But in this moment, inside the marble-floored lobby of the Grand Regalia Hotel, it started with something small, something almost invisible, the kind of moment people usually scroll past without a second thought. Ava Johnson stood near the East Wing entrance, her hands wrapped around the wooden handle of a mop that had seen better days, the faint scent of industrial cleaner rising from the polished floor beneath her feet, her uniform simple, pressed but worn at the seams, black fabric against her dark skin, blending her into the background of a place designed to make people like her disappear. Around her, the lobby glowed with soft golden light reflecting off crystal chandeliers. The low hum of conversation drifting between guests in tailored suits and designer heels, their voices carrying the casual confidence of people who had never been told they didn't belong. Ava kept her head down, moving in steady, practiced motions, left to right, careful not to leave streaks, careful not to be noticed, because invisibility here wasn't just expected, it was survival. She had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, saving every dollar, every tip, every spare cent to send back home, where her mother lay in a hospital bed miles away, fighting a battle Ava couldn't afford to lose. And for a moment, just a moment, it almost worked. Until the laughter started. It wasn't loud at first, just a sharp, cutting sound that didn't match the elegance of the room, followed by the unmistakable click of a phone camera turning on. Ava felt it before she saw it, that shift in attention, the way conversations dimmed and eyes turned, the way a single spotlight seemed to form around her without any physical light changing at all. She looked up slowly, her fingers tightening around the mop handle. And that's when she saw her Madison Blake, perfectly styled, blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, dressed in something that probably cost more than Ava made in a month. Her phone held high in front of her face, the red live icon glowing like a warning Ava couldn't escape. "Oh my God, you guys are not going to believe this." Madison's voice rang out, bright and performative, every word sharpened for an audience that wasn't even physically present. "Look at what just happened to my shoes." Ava blinked, confusion flickering across her face as Madison turned the camera toward a pair of pristine white heels, now marked with a faint smudge near the toe, something so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking for a reason to make it matter. She literally just dragged that dirty mop right over them. Madison continued, angling the phone so it captured Ava fully now, the lens staring at her like an unblinking eye. I mean, seriously, do people just not care anymore? The words landed heavier than they should have, not because of what they said, but because of how easily they were believed. A few guests nearby chuckled, others leaned in slightly, curiosity pulling them closer without commitment, phones beginning to rise one by one as if drawn by instinct, the moment multiplying, expanding, turning into something larger than Ava could control. Ava swallowed, her throat dry, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. "Ma'am, I didn't touch your shoes." For a split second, there was a pause, a fragile space where truth had a chance to exist. Then Madison laughed, not loudly, not cruelly in the obvious sense, but in a way that dismissed Ava entirely, like the idea of her having a voice was itself ridiculous. Did you guys hear that Madison tilted the phone slightly, bringing the camera closer to Ava's face, invading her space without ever physically touching her? She says she didn't do it. More laughter, louder this time, echoed around them, The room no longer just observing, but participating, feeding the moment, feeding the narrative. Ava felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but she didn't move, didn't step back, didn't raise her voice, because she knew how quickly things could get worse if she did. Her grip tightened on the mop, her knuckles paling slightly, her posture straight but still, like she was bracing against something invisible. "So here's what we're going to do," Madison said, her tone shifting just enough to signal control, to make it clear this wasn't just content anymore, it was power. "You're going to apologize. On camera. Right now." The words hung in the air, heavier than before, and for the first time, the room grew quieter, not silent, but expectant, waiting to see what Ava would do next. Somewhere in the background, unnoticed by almost everyone, a man in a black tailored suit stood near the far column, his presence calm, still, his eyes fixed not on the crowd, not on the camera, but on Ava. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just watched. And the moment stretched, fragile and tense, as Ava lifted her gaze just slightly, her voice steady despite everything pressing against her, and said, "I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for something I didn't do." And just like that, something shifted, subtle but undeniable, as if the air itself had changed direction, and somewhere beyond the reach of Madison's camera, another lens had already captured everything. The silence did not break all at once. It unraveled slowly, like tension slipping through fingers no one realized they had clenched. And for a brief second, no one laughed, no one spoke, not even Madison, whose smile flickered just enough to betray the smallest crack in her performance as the comments on her livestream began to shift. Numbers climbing in real time, thousands watching, reacting, questioning, because something about the maid who refused to apologize did not fit the script they had come to expect. Ava could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes multiplying beyond the walls of the lobby, her heartbeat steady but loud in her ears, her chest rising slowly as she forced herself to remain still. Not out of defiance, but out of something quieter, something stronger, the simple refusal to let someone else rewrite her truth. Madison adjusted her grip on the phone, her fingers tightening ever so slightly, the angle shifting to keep Ava centered in the frame. But her voice, when she spoke again, carried a sharper edge, less playful now, more insistent. "So you are saying I am lying?" The question was not really a question. It was a trap, designed to push Ava into a reaction that could be clipped, edited, turned into something else entirely. And the crowd leaned in again, waiting, hungry for escalation. Ava swallowed, her eyes lowering for just a moment before lifting again, steady, respectful, but unwavering. "I am saying I did not touch your shoes, ma'am." The choice of words was careful, measured, and for a second time, the room hesitated, as if unsure how to process someone who refused to play along without raising her voice. A man near the reception desk shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a navy dress glanced at her friend without speaking. And somewhere near the elevators, a bellhop froze mid-step, watching with a quiet tension that did not belong in a place like this. Madison let out a soft exhale that sounded almost like a laugh, but it did not reach her eyes. "Wow. Okay, this is unbelievable," she said, turning the camera briefly back to herself, her expression carefully composed. "You guys are seeing this, right? This is the kind of service we are dealing with now." The comment section exploded, hearts and angry faces and rapid messages flying upward in a blur, some defending, some accusing, most simply reacting to the spectacle without understanding it. And that was when the manager appeared. He moved quickly but not hurriedly, the kind of controlled urgency that came from years of maintaining appearances, his suit immaculate, his smile already forming before he even reached them. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone smooth, diplomatic, but his eyes flicked briefly to Madison's phone, registering the live stream, the audience, the potential damage. Madison turned toward him instantly, relief flashing across her face as she found someone willing to validate her narrative. "Yes, there is a problem. Your staff just ruined my shoes and is refusing to take responsibility," she said, her voice rising just enough to sound justified without losing control. "And now she is arguing with me on camera." The manager nodded slowly, his expression tightening in a way that suggested calculation more than concern. And then he looked at Ava, really looked at her, not as a person, but as a variable in a situation that needed to be resolved quickly and quietly. "Ava, is that correct?" he asked. Though the answer already seemed decided, Ava felt the shift immediately, the subtle but unmistakable change in alignment, and for a moment, something inside her wavered. Not her truth, but her place in this room. The fragile balance she had been maintaining since the moment the camera turned on. "No, sir," she said softly. "I did not touch her shoes." The manager inhaled slowly, his gaze lingering on her for a fraction longer than necessary before he turned back to Madison. "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience," he began, the words polished, practiced. "We will make this right immediately." Ava's fingers tightened again around the mop handle, not in anger, but in something closer to resignation, because she knew what those words usually meant. And around them, the crowd began to relax, the tension easing as the narrative settled into something familiar again, something predictable, something safe. But across the lobby, the man in the black suit had not moved. Victor Castellano stood exactly where he had been, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable, his eyes still fixed on Ava, not with curiosity, not with pity, but with something far more deliberate, as if he was not just watching what was happening, but measuring it, weighing every word, every reaction, every silence. And then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted his gaze, not to Madison, not to the manager, but to a small, nearly invisible camera mounted high in the corner of the ceiling. Its lens angled downward, capturing everything from a distance no one else seemed to notice. The moment lingered there, suspended between what everyone believed was happening and what had actually happened. And somewhere beyond the glow of Madison's live stream, another recording continued quietly, patiently, waiting for the exact moment when the truth would no longer be optional. The manager's apology settled into the room like a decision already made, smooth and polished, designed to close the situation before it could grow any further, and for a moment, it almost worked. The tension easing as a few guests turned away, already losing interest now that the outcome felt predictable, because in places like this, the ending was usually decided long before the truth had a chance to speak. Ava felt it in the way the air shifted around her, in the way eyes that had been watching so closely just moments ago began to drift, their curiosity satisfied not by justice, but by resolution, even if it was the wrong one. And she lowered her gaze slightly, not in defeat, but in quiet understanding of how quickly a story could be rewritten when power chose convenience over truth. "We will have your shoes professionally cleaned and compensated for any inconvenience," the manager continued, his tone steady, his posture firm, every word carefully placed to restore order. And Madison's expression softened immediately, the tension leaving her shoulders as she tilted her phone just enough to capture both herself and the manager in the same frame. Her smile returning, brighter now, validated. "Thank you. "I appreciate that," she said, her voice light again, as if the moment had already been resolved in her favor. The comments on her live stream surged, agreement flooding in, assumptions hardening into belief, and Ava could see it happening in real time, the way a single narrative could take hold when no one stopped to question it. "As for you," the manager said, turning back to Ava, his voice lowering slightly, not loud enough for the entire room, but still captured clearly by the phone only a few feet away. "We will discuss this in the back office." The words were simple, but the implication was not, and Ava felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, the quiet understanding that speaking the truth did not always protect you from consequences, especially when the truth was inconvenient. She nodded once, slowly, her hands still steady on the mop handle. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, even as something inside her tightened just enough to remind her what was at stake. Around them, the crowd began to disperse further, the moment fading from a spectacle into a conclusion, and Madison angled her phone one last time toward Ava, her tone almost playful again. "See, that was not so hard, right?" she said, as if the entire exchange had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience, something to laugh about later. Ava did not respond. She did not need to, because at that exact moment, something else happened. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, the way the lighting near the far column shifted just slightly as a figure stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a kind of deliberate calm that did not belong to someone reacting, but to someone deciding. Victor Castellano moved into the open space of the lobby without raising his voice, without drawing attention in the usual ways, yet somehow the room felt it immediately, the same way it had felt the tension earlier, only this time it was different, heavier, quieter, and far more controlled. The manager noticed him first. His words stopped mid-breath, his posture straightening instinctively as recognition flashed across his face. Not just recognition, but something closer to caution. "Mr. Castellano," he said quickly, his tone shifting in an instant, the polished confidence replaced with something more careful, more measured. Madison turned slightly, her brows knitting together in mild confusion as she adjusted her phone to capture the new arrival, unaware of the shift that had already begun beneath the surface. "Who is that?" she asked softly to her audience, her voice still carrying that casual curiosity, not yet understanding that the moment was no longer hers to control. Victor did not answer immediately. He did not look at Madison, nor did he acknowledge the camera pointed in his direction. His gaze moved past all of it, settling once again on Ava, standing exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, her dignity intact in a way that did not demand attention, but commanded it anyway. For a brief second, the two of them held that silent connection, not familiar, not personal, but something else entirely, something rooted in recognition, as if he had already seen everything he needed to see before he ever took a step forward. Then, finally, he spoke, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a clarity that cut through the room without effort. "Before anyone takes another step," he said, his voice calm, even, "I would like to understand exactly what happened here." The room stilled again, not because he demanded it, but because something in his presence made noise feel out of place. And for the first time since the camera turned on, the narrative hesitated, caught between what had been said and what was about to be revealed, while high above them, unseen and uninterrupted, the security camera continued to record, capturing every angle, every word, every second that would soon matter more than anyone in that room was prepared for. The question did not land like a challenge. It settled into the room like a quiet command. And for a moment, no one moved. Not the guests, not the manager, not even Madison, whose hand holding the phone lowered just slightly as if her instincts were catching up to something her mind had not yet processed. Because the tone Victor Castellano used was not loud, not aggressive, but it carried something far more unsettling, a certainty that did not need to prove itself. The manager cleared his throat, stepping forward just enough to reclaim control of the narrative he believed he still had. "It is a simple misunderstanding, sir," he said, his voice carefully composed. "The guests' shoes were damaged, and we are resolving it." Victor did not look at him immediately. Instead, his gaze remained on Ava for a fraction longer, as if confirming something unspoken, before finally shifting toward the manager with a calm that made the explanation feel smaller than it sounded. "A misunderstanding," Victor repeated softly, not as a question, but as something he was weighing, testing against what he had already observed. Madison straightened slightly, sensing the attention returning to her, her confidence rebuilding as she adjusted her posture and lifted her phone again, angling it toward Victor now, her voice brightening with renewed energy. "Yes, exactly. It is pretty obvious what happened," she said, offering a small laugh as if inviting agreement from both the room and her audience. "I mean, she dragged that mop right over my shoes, and then she refused to apologize." The words came easily, smoothly, practiced in a way that suggested she had told similar stories before. And for a second, the room hovered on the edge of accepting them again, because confidence often sounded like truth to those who did not look too closely. Victor's eyes moved to her then, finally acknowledging her presence, but not the way she expected, not with recognition, not with approval, but with a measured stillness that made her smile falter just slightly. He glanced briefly at the phone in her hand, the glowing screen broadcasting everything to thousands of unseen viewers, and then back to her face. "You are recording this," he said, his voice even as if stating a fact rather than asking a question. Madison nodded quickly, almost eagerly. "Yes, my followers deserve to see how customers are treated here," she replied, her tone shifting into something more performative again. "Transparency matters." A faint pause followed, not long, but deliberate, and then Victor nodded once, slowly. "Good," he said. The single word did not carry approval, but it did not carry objection either, and that ambiguity hung in the air just long enough to unsettle the rhythm Madison had been controlling since the beginning. He turned his attention back to the manager. "You said this is being resolved," he continued. "On what basis did you determine what happened?" The question was precise, leaving little room for vague answers, and the manager hesitated for the first time, his confidence flickering as he glanced briefly at Madison's phone. Aware now that every word mattered beyond this room. "The guest reported that her shoes were damaged," he said, choosing his words carefully, "and the staff member did not deny being present." Victor's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, like a line being drawn that no one else could yet see. "Being present is not the same as being responsible," he replied calmly. The statement was simple, almost obvious, but it landed with a weight that made the manager's explanation feel incomplete, and around them, the few remaining onlookers leaned in again, drawn back into the moment they had thought was already finished. Ava remained where she stood, her hands still, her breathing steady. But now there was something different in the air around her. Not protection, not yet, but possibility, the kind that appears quietly before anyone is ready to name it. Madison shifted her weight slightly, her confidence no longer effortless. "Look, I do not see why this is even a discussion," she said. her voice tightening just enough to reveal the pressure building beneath it. "It is on camera. Everyone saw it." Victor's gaze returned to her, steady, unhurried. "Yes," he said. "Everyone saw what your camera showed." The distinction was subtle, but unmistakable. And for the first time, Madison did not respond immediately. The live stream continued to scroll, comments moving faster now, questions mixing with assumptions, curiosity growing as the tone of the moment began to shift in a way no one could fully control. Victor took a small step forward, not toward Madison, not toward the manager, but slightly to the side, his line of sight angling upward for just a second before returning to the group. "There is another camera," he said calmly. The words landed like a quiet revelation, and the manager's eyes followed Victor's gaze instinctively, tracking upward toward the discreet security lens mounted high above the lobby floor, a device that had been there the entire time, unnoticed, unquestioned, recording without bias, without narrative, without performance. The room went still again, but this time it was different, not expectant, not entertained, but aware, as if everyone present had just realized that the story they had been watching might not be the one that actually happened. And in that silence, Madison's grip on her phone tightened just enough to betray the first hint of uncertainty she could not hide. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they were told to be silent, but because something deeper had taken hold. A quiet realization spreading through the room that the story they had been so ready to accept was no longer stable, no longer certain, and high above them, that small, unnoticed camera suddenly carried more weight than every word that had been spoken. The manager shifted his stance, his confidence no longer smooth, his eyes fixed upward for a second longer than necessary before returning to Victor. "Of course, we can review the footage," he said, his voice steady but thinner now, carefully controlled. "I will have security pull it immediately." Victor gave a slight nod, not approving, not dismissing, simply acknowledging. "Do that," he replied, his tone unchanged, calm as ever, but final in a way that left no room for delay. Madison let out a soft, quick laugh, the kind that tries to fill silence before it grows too large. "I mean, sure, go ahead," she said, lifting her phone slightly again, though her grip was no longer as effortless as before. "It is not going to change anything. Everyone already saw what happened." Her words came quickly, almost too quickly, as if she needed to reinforce them before doubt had time to settle. And for a brief second, the comments on her live stream reflected that same split, some still agreeing, others now questioning, asking about the other camera, asking what it might show, the certainty beginning to fracture in real time. Ava stood quietly, her posture unchanged, but something inside her had shifted. Not relief, not yet, but a steady grounding, the kind that comes when the truth is no longer something you have to defend alone. She did not look up at the camera, did not glance toward Victor, did not move at all, because she understood something most people in that room did not, that truth did not need performance to exist. The manager gestured subtly to a staff member near the reception desk, who immediately moved toward the security office, their steps quick but controlled, and the room held its breath again, not out of spectacle this time, but anticipation of something that could not be undone once revealed. Victor remained still, his presence anchoring the moment, his eyes moving only slightly as he observed each reaction, each shift in posture, each flicker of emotion that crossed Madison's face despite her efforts to maintain control. "It is a simple situation," Madison said again, though her voice no longer carried the same effortless confidence. She was right there with the mop, and my shoes got dirty. "It is not complicated." Victor turned his head slightly toward her, his gaze steady, unhurried. Simple situations rarely need to be repeated, he said quietly. The words were not harsh, but they landed with a clarity that made repetition feel less like confidence and more like insistence. And Madison's lips parted slightly before closing again, her expression tightening just enough to reveal the pressure building beneath her composed exterior. Around them, the remaining guests had stopped pretending to look away, their attention fully drawn back into the moment. But this time, it was different. Not curiosity, not amusement, but something closer to awareness, as if they were witnessing not just an incident, but a correction in motion. The seconds stretched, each one longer than the last, until finally, the staff member returned, holding a small tablet, their expression careful, neutral, but their eyes flicked briefly towards Victor before handing it to the manager. The manager took it with both hands, his fingers tightening slightly around the edges as he glanced down at the screen. And for a moment, no one else could see what he saw. But the change was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. The way his shoulders stiffened, the way his breath paused just long enough to break his rhythm. He did not speak right away. He could not. Because the version of events he had already accepted was no longer aligning with what was in front of him. Victor did not ask what the footage showed. He did not need to. He simply watched the manager, waiting, giving him the space to process, to understand, to choose how he would respond, now that the truth was no longer abstract. The silence deepened, heavier now, more grounded, until finally. The manager looked up, his gaze moving first to Ava, then to Madison, and something in his expression had changed. Not dramatically, not publicly, but enough that the room felt it instantly. Madison's grip on her phone tightened again, her smile fading completely this time, replaced by a tension she could no longer mask. "Well," she said, her voice sharper now, edged with impatience. "What does it show?" The manager hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and in that pause, everything shifted, because the answer he was about to give would not just resolve the moment. It would redefine it entirely. And Victor Castellano, standing calmly at the center of it all, did not move, did not interrupt, did not raise his voice, because he understood something no one else had fully grasped yet, that real power did not need to speak loudly when the truth was about to speak for itself. The manager's hesitation stretched just long enough to make every second feel deliberate, his eyes dropping back to the screen as if confirming what he had already seen, as if hoping, just for a moment, that there had been some mistake, but there was none. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight it had not held before. The footage shows, he paused again, not out of uncertainty, but out of recognition that what he was about to say would undo everything that had just been accepted as truth, that the staff member did not make contact with the guest's shoes. The words landed quietly, but they did not need volume to carry impact, because in the stillness of the room, they echoed louder than any accusation that had come before. Madison blinked, once, twice, her expression shifting so quickly it almost escaped notice, the confidence draining from her posture as her grip on the phone tightened. "That is not possible," she said immediately, her voice sharper now, less controlled. "Everyone saw it. It is literally on my live stream." The manager did not respond right away, his gaze moving from her back to the tablet, then toward Ava, and something in his expression softened, not dramatically, but enough to signal that his understanding of the situation had changed. "The camera angle shows clearly," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "that the mop remained at least 12 inches away from the shoes at all times." A faint murmur rippled through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable, the kind of sound that forms when certainty begins to collapse under its own weight. Ava did not move, but her shoulders lowered just slightly, the tension she had been holding easing in a way only she could feel, her breathing steady, her eyes still calm, because the truth had not changed, only the room had finally caught up to it. Madison shook her head, a small, quick motion, as if trying to dismiss the words before they could take hold. "That does not prove anything," she said, her voice rising just enough to reveal the pressure behind it. "Maybe the camera missed it, or maybe it is the angle. You cannot just... It is not one angle." The manager interrupted, not loudly, but firmly, and the shift in his tone was unmistakable now, no longer accommodating, no longer aligning with her version of events. "There are multiple cameras covering this area." The sentence was simple, but it closed the space Madison had been trying to keep open, and for the first time since the moment began, she had no immediate response. The live stream continued, comments accelerating, questions multiplying, the narrative shifting in real time as viewers began to piece together what was happening. The earlier confidence giving way to confusion, then skepticism, then something closer to realization. Victor remained exactly where he stood, his expression unchanged, his presence steady. But now the room had aligned with him. The quiet authority he carried no longer standing apart from the situation, but defining it. He glanced briefly toward the tablet, then back to the manager. "Show it," he said, his voice calm. Not a command, but not a suggestion either. The manager hesitated for only a fraction of a second before turning the screen outward, angling it so Madison could see, so the nearest guests could see, so the version of events that had been built on assumption could be replaced by something undeniable. On the screen, the footage played back in smooth, silent clarity. Ava moving slowly across the floor, the mop gliding in careful arcs, stopping well short of Madison's shoes, the distance visible, measurable, unquestionable. And then, a moment later, Madison stepping forward on her own, the faint smudge appearing not from contact, but from something already present on the floor, something small, ordinary, unnoticed until it became useful. The video ended, and for a moment, no one spoke. Madison stared at the screen, her lips parted slightly, her expression caught between disbelief and calculation, as if searching for a way to reinterpret what she had just seen. But there was none. The room did not laugh this time. It did not react with noise or spectacle. It simply went quiet, the kind of silence that does not come from shock alone, but from understanding. Ava stood in the same place, her posture unchanged, her dignity intact, but now the space around her felt different, not because she had changed, but because the way she was seen had shifted, and across from her. Victor Castellano finally moved, just a single step forward, his gaze steady, his voice measured as he spoke again. "It seems," he said, "that the only thing captured incorrectly was the story." The words did not echo, but they settled into the room with a finality that no one could ignore. And for the first time since the moment began, the balance had shifted completely, not through force, not through argument, but through something far more decisive: clarity. Madison's phone was still pointed outward, still broadcasting, but her hand had lowered just enough to break the perfect framing she had maintained from the start. And on the screen, the comments had changed entirely, no longer a flood of agreement, but a storm of questions, disbelief, and sudden accountability that moved faster than she could process. That does not show everything," she said, her voice no longer smooth, the edges now visible, her words searching for ground that no longer existed. "You cannot just take one clip and pretend that is the full story." The manager did not respond immediately this time, Not because he did not have an answer, but because he no longer needed to defend one. His position no longer aligned with hers. His posture now straight in a different way, not protective, but corrective. "It is not one clip," he said calmly. "It is continuous footage from multiple angles." The certainty in his voice did not rise, but it deepened, and the room felt it. Ava remained still, her gaze lowered slightly, not out of submission, but out of restraint, as if she understood that the moment no longer belonged to her defense, but to the unfolding of something larger than herself. Around them, the last few guests who had tried to disengage now stood fully turned toward the scene, their attention anchored not by spectacle, but by realization, the kind that does not invite laughter, only reflection. Madison's eyes flicked quickly across the room, then back to her phone, then to Victor, as if searching for an ally, for someone who would restore the version of reality she had created. But there was none, and that absence was louder than anything that had been said. "I have a reputation," she added suddenly, her voice tightening, shifting from accusation to defense. "People follow me because I show the truth." Victor's gaze remained steady, his expression unchanged, but there was something in the way he listened that made her words feel smaller, not dismissed, but measured and found lacking. "Then you understand the responsibility that comes with being seen," he replied, his tone even not confrontational, but precise. And the sentence did not attack. It clarified. Madison opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out, not immediately, because for the first time, the weight of her own platform had turned back toward her, and it did not feel the same when it was no longer in her control. The livestream continued, the numbers climbing higher now, not because of drama, but because of reversal, because people were sharing, commenting, pointing out what had been missed, what had been assumed, what had been wrong. Ava's name had not been spoken by the audience before, but now it began to appear in the scrolling feed. Questions about her, support for her, recognition of her calm, her restraint, her refusal to bend under pressure. And still, she did not move. She did not step forward, did not speak again, did not claim the moment, because she did not need to. The truth had already done that for her. The manager turned fully toward Ava now, his posture shifting once more, this time not in authority, but in acknowledgement. "Ava," he said, his voice steady, but softer than before. "You were correct. The sentence was simple, but it carried something deeper than apology. It carried recognition. And in a room where she had been invisible just minutes ago. That recognition changed everything." Ava lifted her gaze slightly, meeting his eyes for just a second, and nodded once, a small, quiet motion. Not triumphant, not emotional, just present. Victor watched this exchange without interruption, his attention moving between them, not controlling the outcome, but allowing it to settle naturally, because the most powerful shift had already occurred. The room itself had changed. Madison's phone dipped further now, no longer held high, the camera angle uneven, her face partially out of frame as she looked down at the screen, reading the comments she could no longer ignore, her expression tightening with each passing second, the realization no longer avoidable. "This is being taken out of context," she said again. But the words no longer carried weight, not because they were challenged, but because they had already been answered by something undeniable. Victor took one final step forward, his presence closing the distance just enough to bring the moment to its conclusion, his voice calm, steady, and unmistakably clear as he spoke. "Context does not change what actually happened," he said, and the room did not react with noise, not this time. Because there was nothing left to argue, Nothing left to reinterpret, only the quiet, undeniable presence of truth, standing exactly where it had been from the beginning. No one rushed to fill the silence that followed. Not anymore, because something fundamental had shifted in the space between them. The kind of shift that does not invite noise, only reflection. And for the first time since the moment began, the lobby of the Grand Regalia Hotel felt less like a stage and more like a place where something real had just occurred. Madison lowered her phone completely now, the live stream still running but no longer controlled. The angle tilted downward, capturing fragments instead of framing a narrative, her fingers tightening around the device as if she could still contain what was already slipping beyond her reach. Her eyes moved across the screen, scanning the rapid stream of comments that no longer aligned with her version of events. Words like rewatch, check the footage, and that is not what happened appearing faster than she could process. Each one, another thread unraveling the story she had built. She looked up again, her gaze landing briefly on Ava, and for the first time, there was no accusation there, no performance, just a fleeting moment of something harder to define, something closer to recognition, though it passed quickly, replaced by the instinct to regain control. "This is getting blown out of proportion," she said, her voice quieter now, less certain, as if she was speaking more to herself than to anyone else. It was just a misunderstanding. The words echoed differently this time, not because they had changed, but because the room had, and no one responded. Not with agreement, not with reassurance, just with the quiet understanding that had already settled in. The manager took a slow breath, his posture steady but no longer defensive, his attention now fully aligned with what had been revealed. "Miss Blake," he said, his tone measured, respectful but firm. "We will need to address the impact of what was recorded and shared." He did not raise his voice, did not accuse, but the meaning was clear, and for the first time, the responsibility that came with the camera was no longer abstract. It was immediate. Madison's lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but she hesitated, her gaze flicking once more to the phone in her hand, then back to the room, where every set of eyes now carried a different kind of attention, not admiration, not curiosity, but awareness. Ava remained still, her presence unchanged, but the space around her had transformed completely. No longer something people looked past, but something they recognized, and that recognition did not need to be loud to be powerful. Victor shifted his gaze toward the manager, his expression calm but deliberate. "Make sure the full footage is preserved," he said, his voice even, not edited, not shortened, exactly as it happened. The instruction was simple, but it carried a weight that extended beyond the room, beyond the moment, into whatever would follow, and the manager nodded immediately. "Of course," he replied, already understanding the significance. Madison looked between them, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the realization forming beneath it, that the narrative she had controlled moments ago was no longer hers, that it had moved into a space she could not shape, could not filter, could not direct. "I did not mean for this to go this far," she said quietly, the words almost lost in the stillness, and for the first time they sounded less like justification and more like acknowledgement. Ava's gaze lifted slightly at that, meeting Madison's for just a brief moment, and there was no anger there, no triumph, just a steady presence that did not need to respond, because the moment had already spoken for itself. The live stream continued, but now it was different, no longer a spectacle, but a record, something people would replay, not for entertainment, but for understanding, for the shift they had just witnessed, for the way a single moment could reveal something deeper about the way people choose to see one another. Victor turned slightly, his attention moving away from the center of the room, not dismissing it, but concluding his role within it. His presence no longer needed to hold the moment together, because it had already settled into something stable. As he stepped back, the room did not return to what it had been before. It did not simply resume its quiet luxury and polished conversations, because something had changed beneath the surface, something that would linger long after the moment passed. In the way people looked at each other, in the way they hesitated before assuming, in the way they remembered what had just happened, and in the center of it all, Ava Johnson stood exactly where she had been from the beginning, no longer invisible, not because she had demanded attention, but because she had never needed to. The lobby did not return to normal, not right away, because moments like that do not simply disappear. They linger, settling into the quiet corners of memory where people replay what they saw and what they almost missed. And as the soft murmur of conversation slowly began to rise again, it carried a different tone, less certain, more aware, as if everyone present had been reminded of something they did not expect to learn that day. Madison stood still for a few seconds longer. Her phone now lowered completely at her side, the live stream still active, but no longer the center of attention, her reflection faintly visible in the dark screen as the comments continued to move without her guidance, without her control. And for the first time since she had pressed the record button, she did not know what to say. The manager stepped slightly closer to her, his voice quiet but professional. "We will follow up with you regarding the content that was shared," he said. Not threatening, not emotional, just clear. And she nodded once, slowly, the movement small but heavy with understanding, because the consequences were no longer hypothetical. They were already unfolding. Across the room, a few guests began to walk away, not in disinterest, but in contemplation, their steps slower than before, their expressions thoughtful, as if they were carrying something with them that had not been there when they arrived. And near the reception desk, the bellhop who had frozen earlier finally moved again, his gaze lingering on Ava for just a moment longer before returning to his work. But even that glance carried a quiet respect that had not existed before. Ava shifted her weight slightly, the first movement she had made in several minutes, her hands relaxing around the mop handle as the tension fully left her shoulders, not in relief alone, but in something steadier, something rooted in knowing that she had not needed to become louder to be heard. The manager turned back toward her, his expression composed but sincere. "Ava, you are cleared to return to your shift," he said, his tone respectful, no longer dismissive, and she nodded once. "Thank you, sir." Her voice calm, unchanged, but now received differently than before. Victor Castellano had already begun to step away, his presence no longer anchoring the moment, but leaving it behind in a way that felt intentional, not abrupt, and as he passed by Ava, he slowed just slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough to acknowledge, his voice low, steady, meant only for her. "You handled that well," he said, and there was no exaggeration in it, no unnecessary praise, just recognition. And Ava met his gaze briefly. "I just told the truth," she replied softly. Victor gave a small nod, as if that was exactly the answer he expected. And then he continued walking, his figure blending back into the quiet elegance of the space, but leaving something behind that would not fade as easily. The live stream, still running, captured the final moments without direction, without performance, just fragments of reality as it settled, and somewhere beyond the walls of the hotel. The video began to spread again, not as it had started, but as it had ended. The full footage, the complete story, the moment where assumption met truth and could not survive it. Hours later, the clip would be shared across platforms, not because of outrage alone, but because of the contrast, the shift, the quiet strength of someone who refused to be rewritten, and the calm intervention of someone who chose to see before deciding. But in that moment, inside the lobby, none of that had fully unfolded yet. Ava returned to her work, guiding the mop across the floor in the same steady motion as before, the same quiet rhythm, the same careful attention, but now, the space around her felt different, not because she had changed, but because the way she was seen had. A guest passing by paused for just a second, offering a small nod of acknowledgement before continuing on. And it was a simple gesture, almost insignificant, but it carried more meaning than the laughter that had filled the room earlier. The chandeliers still cast their golden light. The marble floors still reflected every movement. The conversations slowly returned to their usual tone. But beneath it all, something remained. Something that could not be undone by moving on too quickly. And somewhere, in the quiet memory of everyone who had been there, one detail stood out more than anything else. Not the accusation, not the live stream, not even the reversal, but the moment a woman stood still in the middle of it all and refused to apologize for something she did not do. And that day, without raising her voice, without asking for attention, without needing anyone to speak for her. Ava Johnson reminded everyone watching exactly what dignity looks like.